Hey, I want to make a video addressing some Marine Corps lore. Most notably is that the Marine Corps chose to enter World War II with a bolt-action rifle, specifically the M1903, versus a semi-automatic replacement. That's semi-true and semi-not, and we will get into that. But first, I want to discuss the origins of the M1903 and why it was so beloved among the Marine Corps. So, the M1903 Springfield was an American rifle, bolt action, carried 5 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. This was based off a Mauser design, the action specifically. This was adopted by the Marine Corps in 1909. And of course, the most popular version we know is chambered in 30-06. So this served with the Marine Corps for over 40 years, obviously adopted in 1909, served in almost every continent in the world: China, the Banana Wars, in the Pacific in World War II, obviously in France in World War I, and sniper versions of this rifle even served into and past Korea. The Marines adored this rifle. The action was extremely strong. It was very reliable and extremely accurate. So much so that when they tested the Garand, they tested it in comparison to the M1903 out to 1,200 yards. Of course, being a semi-automatic rifle, there's not a lot of gas lost in the action and in the operation. So this was an extremely powerful weapon out to very long ranges. So much so that General Pershing, who was the commander of the American Expeditionary Force in France, commented that the deadliest weapon in the world is a Marine and his rifle. The Marine rifle team won a ton of awards at the national matches in Camp Perry, Ohio, with the M1903, and I think they probably chose to use these over Garands even forward. But the Marine Corps and the United States government in general realized, the Marine Corps specifically realized, there were two things that they were going to need in the next conflict. And of course, we were predicting a conflict in the Pacific with Japan, and they said we need volume of fire and reliability. A bolt-action rifle is extremely reliable, but it does not get us to the volume of fire that we may need to make contested landings. So the Marine Corps, as well as the U.S. government, realized as early as World War I that we're going to need a semi-automatic replacement to our bolt-action rifle complement. So in enters John C. Garand, or Garand. John Garand was a Canadian-born weapons designer, engineer, and he was hired by Springfield Armory, which at that time was an armory owned and operated basically by the U.S. Ordnance Bureau. So it was owned by the U.S. government, oversaw by an Army officer, and he brought his first basically prototype, which would become the M1 Garand. So he got hired by Springfield Armory in 1920. The rifle looked somewhat different than it does today. And he was tasked with developing a semi-automatic rifle. And at that point, there were huge amounts of 30-06 in the stockpile, and he was basically tasked with designing a 30-06 rifle. They would attempt other calibers, most notably like the 276 Peterson, but 30-06, really based on the amount of belted and clipped ammunition we had in stockpile, was going to be the standard through World War II. So John C. Garand, hired by Springfield Armory, which is as we discussed, an Army really essentially owned operation. And he brought this prototype with him. Now there's a Marine Corps twist. So he's designing this rifle through the 20s, through the 30s. Of course, this is a time of the Great Depression. Money is extremely tight. The federal budget is extremely tight. So there's a lot of business, a lot of money and politics involved with this. Army officers are involved with this program. Basically, they're endorsing it. They're putting their careers on the line to endorse the Garand product. But there's someone who's critical of this rifle, most notably Maynard Johnson, who is a captain in the Marine Corps Reserve. And at 1936, he's like a hobbyist weapons designer, and he realizes that there are some issues with the Garand. Now, this is not a modern, but an updated, basically standard issue Garand. At that time in the 30s, the gas system was different. There's a lot of components that were different than are now, which reduced the reliability. And Captain Johnson realized, hey, if the Marine Corps or the U.S. military, if we're going to send people into combat with a rifle, it needs to be reliable, needs to be accurate. And there are things with the Garand design that I do not like and that I think I can design better. So Johnson brings his prototype. This is known as like the M1941 Johnson. And there's a few things. Most notably, there's not a large gas system at the end of the barrel. He felt that was unreliable. The barrel is exposed, which, when we talk about volume of fire, allows the barrel to cool off more quickly than the enclosed Garand barrel. As far as follow-on shots and ease of shooting, the barrel reciprocates to a certain point, which I feel allows easier shooting. And as opposed to the 8-round end block, which feeds the Garand rifle, which cannot be topped off easily or replenished or replaced in combat, this features a 10-round rotary magazine, which allows the shooter to feed the rifle with 5-round Springfield stripper clips quickly, but also single feed rounds, maybe after an engagement or mid-fight when there's a lull. You can top this off one by one with rounds or a 5-round stripper clip. So Johnson submits his rifle for testing. Now, this is 1936. By this time, 16 years of money, investment, political careers have gone into the Ordnance Bureau and have gone into the Garand Rifle Project. So there's tests at Aberdeen. There's tests with senators. There's a lot of politicking. There's a lot of newspaper articles, people testifying before Congress. Johnson feels that the deck is stacked against him. Of course, he's an outsider. He's a Marine officer. Inter-service rivalry is always huge, and there are Army officers and Army careers riding on the line of the Garand. I will not go into the tests and what the results were and what the findings were and the critiques of the tests and the critiques of the rifle. I have Bruce Canfield's book. It's a fantastic book. He goes into it. You can see it's like, I think it's like 1,000 pages. He goes into the details of what the testing was, whose firing pins broke, whose extractors broke, what failed to feed, what failed to fire. And it's really a fantastic and interesting read, but can't go into all that information now. So Johnson's rifle, he tries to find some favor with the Marine Corps. He finds a small audience. So really the Marine Corps winds up buying his version of light machine gun. So this is his semi-automatic rifle. He made a light machine gun variant, which was more or less deemed superior to the BAR that had been in the Armory since 1918. Those are issued to Paramarines, most notably, and a handful of rifles. I think he donates like 23 are found in the hand, mostly of Paramarines, and then some of the Raiders. Most notably, I think a Johnson rifle makes it to Iwo Jima in the hands of a Marine by the name of Tolgerson. He has a statue due to his valorous actions on Iwo Jima, and he is carrying, at least in the statue, an M41 Johnson rifle designed and manufactured by a Marine. He sells these to the Dutch East Indies government, but ultimately does not find adoption by the U.S. widespread again. Some specialized U.S. Marine Corps units, but for the most part, the Garand is a front runner. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, Johnson designs this rival to the Garand. The Marine Corps is not set on the Garand. So, in 1938, the Marine Corps orders about 400 M1 Garands, and they go to 1-6. And they basically tell the battalion commander, hey, take these to the field, shoot these, let us know what you think. Again, they have a little more primitive gas system. So they go to 1-8, or excuse me, go to 1-6, and there's 600 rifles and various units. And they find a couple interesting things. First off, of course, they find the rate of expert qualifications goes down from the M1903 to the Garand. It's by nature of being semi-automatic, quicker firing. However, there are some accuracy issues, as well as the sights are a little bit different. Marines really did not like the sights on the M1 Garand as opposed to the M1903. They complained that the front sight was too thick. And when you're going from pretty accurate sights of an M1903 to a semi-automatic rifle, you can understand why some of the qualification scores went down. So they found, they did some tests, they put in surf and tried to take some field conditions, but they realized that that, hey, we have some things we need to work on before we're going to adopt this. So in early 1940, the Marine Corps General Holcomb, who is the commandant of the Marine Corps, decides the M1 is not for us just yet. We're not writing it off. We're not saying we don't want a semi-automatic rifle. We see the need for one. However, in its current state, the M1 Garand is not what we need. So this goes back to Springfield. The report goes back to Springfield. And in November 1940, they test an updated M1 Garand alongside a Johnson rifle and a Winchester prototype rifle. I know a Winchester prototype rifle, they probably go for like $1 million or something. I've never seen one. But they test these three rifles. And what they find is that the Garand, for the most part, comes out superior. There are some issues with the reliability as compared to the 1903, however, but they feel that the volume of fire, the accuracy, and overall, the Garand is the rifle for the Marine Corps going forward, to the point that in early February 1941, they designate the M1 Garand as the official service rifle of the Marine Corps. Now, the first unit that goes overseas, which would be the 7th Marines, to go and counter any Japanese landings in Samoa, were not carrying Garands. They were carrying 1903s. The reason for that is because the Marine Corps still wants to feel out, hey, this is a brand new rifle. It's a brand new system. We need to figure out a system of cleaning, of maintenance. We need to basically work the kinks out of this new system before we give it to the guys on the front lines in the jungle. So when the first shipments of Garands arrive, they go to shipboard detachments. They go to the 3rd Defense Battalion. They go to the defense battalions, and they're basically figuring that these Marines are in austere environments. However, they are not the ones making landings on opposed beaches. So they can figure out the cleaning and things to report back to the Marine Corps, so the Marine Corps can issue these Garands out, and they can function when Marines need them. So the first Marines to take, as far as my understanding, the first Marines to take Garands into combat are the Raiders on raids, on the Macon Island raids. So the first Marines really to use these in combat would be the 2nd Marines in the landings just outside Guadalcanal on Florida Island, the 1st and 2nd Marine Raider battalions, as well as the 3rd Defense Battalion, and they were interspersed among the 11th Marine Regiment on Guadalcanal. So you're talking mid to late 1942. The Macon Island raid is a little before that, would be the first use by Marines of M1 Garand in combat. Marines on Guadalcanal, I'm sure if you asked Marines then, you'd get as various opinions as Marines today about service rifles. I'm sure some were looking for Garands from other units or trying to steal ones, and others like their 1903s. They like the traditional bolt action, they like the reliability, they like the accuracy. That said, the 1st Marine Division, after they rotated back to Australia, were issued Garands in combat in early 1943. And the Marines would use Garands up until just before Vietnam. And really the last use you see of Garands overseas would be the occupation of Lebanon in the 50s. But served really without complaint through World War II and Korea. And then, of course, the M14, you could argue, is a descendant of the M1 Garand, which served, most Marines enjoyed that over the M16 in Vietnam. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I was able to dispel some myths and shed some light on the Marine Corps' acquisition process, kind of the complicated political and financial situation of the U.S. military and the U.S. Marine Corps in the 30s and 40s, and just the fact that the Marine Corps, despite popular belief, was not stuck in its ways. We were not so traditional that we couldn't get out of our own way. We knew we needed to adopt a semi-automatic rifle. We just want to make sure when we were issuing one out to Marines that it was reliable and effective. And of course, the background to this is, at the time, the Marine Corps is an extremely small service, didn't have the money to invest in its own research and development, and to a certain extent was hamstrung by the Army and the Army's development process, and at a certain point, the Army's development of an Army internal rifle, which turned out to be the M1 Garand. So some similarities, differences from today. Curious what you guys think in the comments and what you would rather take if you were landing on an island tomorrow?